Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the PacBrake Alpha HD airbag suspension kit here on our 2020 GMC Sierra 1500. So whether you're going to be hauling a bunch of different trailers or you're just hauling one trailer that's going to have a bunch of varying loads in it, you're going to want something that's going to be able to adjust to each one of those loads, so that way your trailer is always riding level and your suspension on your vehicle is also going to be riding level as well. Now when we take a look at our trailer, when we start to sag down, we're going to see our back end here start to dip down a whole lot more. And what that means is we're putting way more pressure on our rear suspension versus our front suspension. So with all that weight back here, now we're wearing our tires down quicker because these are taking way more pressure on them now. So now that tire tread is wearing a lot faster. So it might not be uneven wear, but now we have more wear than what we would have compared to our front tires. Now, when we get up to the front, that's where you're going to start seeing that uneven wear because we don't have that even pressure that we would typically have. And on top of that, now our headlights aren't pointing down at the ground, they're going to be pointing up at the vehicle in front of us. So we're going to be losing handling, stopping power, and now visibility, all because we don't have our load correctly handled. So just to give you an example of this, so typically your rear suspension does have a bit of a lift to it to begin with, so it is designed to kind of sag a little bit, but as you start adding too much weight, that's where we start sagging a bit more than what we'd typically want, and that's where the air springs come into play. So this trailer right here has probably about 600 to 700 pounds, about tongue weight, and we're going to drop that down on here, and you can start to see the bed will start sinking down as we start putting that full weight of the trailer on there. All right, now the full weight of the trailer is on our truck now, so you can see we are starting to sag here. I'm sure the bags are helping out just a bit because they are taking up a little bit of that with even just that 5 psi in there, but we can show you real quickly just how fast it is to bring this right back up to ride height. Now, one of the big things here with this is also that we're really nose down because this isn't lifting up because we are sagging. So not only are we having all those issues with our rear suspension and then also tire wear and lighting issues up at front, but now also with the trailer being nose down, that could also lead to some sway issues with it as well. So this isn't only going to affect just the tow vehicle, this is also affecting how our trailer handles. So I have the air chuck right here. Let's get it aired back up. Now I'm filling up a manual fill port, but I highly recommend picking up a onboard compressor. That'll just mount up to your frame rail, and then you can adjust those airbags whether it's up or down while you're on the go. Then you're not having to run a super long cord out to a air chuck inside the building, or trying to haul around an air compressor wherever you're going. So as we bring this up, you can see the right side's lifting up already. So now within a matter of seconds, we've aired up those air springs, and that's brought us right back to what we need to be at with our factory ride height. It's leveled out our trailer, so that way we know we can tow safely. So with this, the amount of adjustability you're going to have is within that 5 psi up to that 100 psi, and that 100 psi is going to be about 5,000 pounds of load leveling capacity. Now that doesn't mean that we can just throw 5,000 pounds in the bed of our truck. That just means that it's going to help and have 5,000 pounds worth of help to bring us just back to that factory ride height. But we need to stay within what our vehicle's limitations are. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you are double checking your owner's manual and figuring out what the payload capacity is, and also just sticking with whatever your gross towing weight capacity is, because we don't want to be overloading our vehicle with our trailer. So with all that being said, why don't we talk about installation. As far as these go, this was my first time doing a PacBrake install. But honestly, it was pretty easy. They give you really good instructions. There's a bunch of variations within those instructions just depending on your trim level. Different variations between the packages, whether that's even just with diesel models, gasoline models. So they really kind of put a lot of focus into it. They give you all the tools that you're going to really need to get this done here. So overall, I would say this is a pretty easy one that you could do at home. There wasn't anything special I really had to do to this. It really wasn't a huge fight. The only thing that I felt was a little weird was trying to cut off those J-bolts that actually clamp to the axle tube itself. That I didn't really feel comfortable with doing while the bags were in place, but when I did the second one, I just cut them down after double checking what size I really needed them to be. So that'd be my only little bit of advice. Maybe do that beforehand and then bring those back up, just so you don't risk accidentally cutting any other components that are down under your vehicle. But with that said, if this is something you feel you just don't really have the time to do, or you're just not super confident in being able to accomplish this yourself, then please feel free to use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code and find a shop near you to get this professionally installed. If you are wanting to do this yourself though, stick around and I'll walk you through the process. So starting off our install, I have already removed our spare tire. I've also taken on the heat shield. You honestly don't need to really take it off. I'm doing so just because it kind of blocks our view with the camera, but I was able to easily slide the air springs in. Still wasn't an issue for me. Now, if you don't have a lift at home, obviously you're gonna need to figure out a different way to get some more room under here to work. So what they actually recommend is to lift up by the frame and then take your wheels off. So you got a little bit more access, and that way when you are going to put the air spring in, because it's all gonna be built up first and then placed in here, that way you can just come right through between the frame rail and your leaf springs. Now I do have a jack here holding up our frame, so I am getting a little bit more separation between my frame rail and my axle here so that I can get it in a little bit easier. If you are doing it the method I am, make sure that you're chalking those front wheels, because we don't want our vehicle to shift at all from that pressure kind of pushing up on the back here. But with all that said, now we can finally get into actually disassembling our stock jounce bumper. And to do so, I'm going to be using a Shortwell 10mm socket with a 2-inch extension. And I'm going to pop that in there. We'll just remove this bolt and set our jounce bumper aside. Now, if you do have the frame separated a little bit more like I do, you could probably use a deep well, but without that, the first time I did this, I didn't have the lift up as much, so getting a deep well in there wasn't really possible with our stop pad here. There we go. So our next step is going to be removing this plastic bracket. This holds a bunch of wiring in our brake lines. And to do so, there's going to be 3 separate T40 Torx bit screws that are going to be in there. So we'll get all of these popped out. And then once that's popped out, we can just kind of let it hang loose, because we're going to need a little bit of wiggle room, and we might have to kind of bend our hard brake lines just a bit to get them out of the way so it doesn't rub up against our air spring. So now we're going to start assembling our air spring. On the side where it's got 3 holes, that's going to be our top, and we're going to slide on a roll plate. And then our airline fitting, it's going to be a 90-degree fitting. Now, it doesn't come with sealant on it, and in the instructions they say it might not. If it doesn't, make sure that you pick up some yourself. We've got some thread tape that we have placed on already, and we are going to thread this in. We're going to go hand tight, and then once we are hand tight, we will then take a 9/16 wrench, and we're going to give it a 1.5 turn here. So 1. And a half. And now at this point we are going to do a leak test. So we would need to cut our line in half, which I've already done, and the easiest way to do that is to kind of unwind it just a bit, and you'll have your 2 ends with your Schrader valves. So I'll put those 2 together and I'll kind of just pull the line until I get all the way to a middle point, and then I will snip it. Now we have some really nice cutters here, but luckily they also include an airline tube cutter for you, because you don't want to just use standard scissors. You need a really nice sharp razor blade so that you get a really clean cut on here, because any little burrs, or if this is kind of cut at a weird angle, then it's not going to fully seat into our fitting, and then we're going to end up having an air leak. So it's super important to get that just perfect, otherwise you're going to end up having issues later on. So if you need to, you can keep cutting off little bits until you get it just right. I know the first cut when you separate the two pieces usually isn't perfect just because this is trying to bend on you the whole time. But now that we have that ready, we'll pop that in, and then we're going to air this up to 30 psi and do our leak test. All right, we're going to spray that with some soapy water. And you can see we've got bubbles forming. So in the instructions, they tell you to go another half turn to help seal it up a little bit better. I'm going to have to kind of pick this up and get a better grip on it though. So this is pretty tight to begin with. All right, now we'll wipe that off and we'll see if that fixed our leak problem. So now it doesn't look like we have any bubbles forming, so we should be good to go here. We don't need to tighten it anymore. Now we can let all that air back out and we can pop off our fitting here. So what we're going to do, you'll probably want a smaller wrench than a 1/2 inch, probably about 1/4. But the goal here is just pressing against this little ring that's on the outside here. Once you compress that, it'll pull in the teeth and then allow you to pull the airline tubing back out. Now this one is going to be for my driver's side, so I want my airline fitting facing out towards the left so that it's facing away from our frame rail. We're going to have this bracket right here, and this triangle portion of it at the back here is needing to face towards the rear of the vehicle. The rectangle portion is going to face towards the front of the vehicle. So we will slip this on, and our holes are going to line up, and we will have some hex bolts and a flat washer that we are going to be threading in here. And for these, you'll want a 9/16 socket, and we'll tighten those down and torque them as well. When you go to torque it, lay it down on its side. That way you can use the bracket to push against and make it a whole lot easier. And then we're going to flip this upside down, but we also want to make sure that we are keeping our orientation correct too. So I'm going to flip it that way. This one's running towards our rear. Our next roll plate can go on, and then we want the larger portion. So the larger rectangle and the smaller one's going to go towards the front here. And we want to line this up the same way with our airline fitting. So with this flipped over, our airline fitting's on this right side. We want to make sure that we're using the left holes here so our bracket is matching up with the upper bracket as well. And for that, there's going to be these cone-shaped screws that are flat on the top, and these require a 5.5 millimeter hex tool in order to thread down. And these will also be torqued. I wouldn't go too tight on that first one until you have your second one pretty much set. That way you have everything perfectly lined up. And then we can come back with our torque wrench. We'll lay it on its side again and torque it down. Now we're back under the vehicle, and I've got the larger of the two self-threading bolts, and we are at the hole right behind our jounce bumper cup. So this is going more towards the rear of the vehicle, and we are going to pop this in and have this start to cut some threads into there. So I'll be using the 3/4 inch socket, and we want to make sure that we have this going up as straight as possible. So just take your time with it, because this is going to be cutting in threads for it to thread into later on once we have our bracket in place. We'll run this about 3/4 of the way up, and then we can back it out. Once we have it out, clean off that frame grease that's on it, and we are going to put some anti-seize as well. So one thing I like to do to make installing the air spring a little bit easier is just to compress all of the air that I can out of it. And then I've got an old Schrader valve with a cap on it and a little piece of airline tubing. And as soon as I get this compressed, I'm going to pop that in there, and that's going to hold it so that more air can't get back in and give me a little bit more wiggle room. Alright, so now we're going to slip in our air spring, and luckily there is a good amount of space here, so should be able to get it in pretty easily. But make sure that you have your airline fitting facing outwards toward the wheel. Slide that over, and now we can grab some of our hardware. That bolt that we put that the anti-seize on, we're going to be running that up through this hole right here. And we're also going to have a U-bolt that we're going to go over the frame rail up towards the front here, and it's going to come down and pop through the two outer holes in the front of our bracket. So since we want to be clear of the hard lines, I'm going to set this up flat, and we're going to get it behind them. That way it's not pinching on those as we start to tighten down. And then we'll get this lined up. Now, if you get to a spot where the hard line is kind of rubbing on there, this is where you'll want to gently just bend it out. So we don't want that to sit there and vibrate and then rub against there and bust that. All right, well, now that we got that in, we're going to take two of our flange nuts. That's these guys right here, and we're going to put that on. We don't need to do it super tight just yet. I'm just kind of getting everything set in place, and then we can tighten up everything once we have all of it kind of ready to go. Next, I'm going to put this in. I might need to pop out my air line and let the bag fill back up a little bit more though. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to grab a 1/4 inch wrench like I talked about earlier, and we'll press that up against the fitting, and then that's going to allow us to release this airline fitting, and then we can have some air pushed back in there, have our brackets sit flush. Alright, so I tightened up that one a bit. I've just snugged it down. I haven't fully torqued it just yet, but now we're going to start with our J hook pins here, and now these are just going to match up with the holes that we have on the back. So there's going to be two here. There are two holes in the front, but we're only going to be using one on the front just because of the way that the air bag is going to be sitting against that. So the big thing here is that we're also going to have to cut these. So we don't want these to sit up past the roll plate. So once we actually have these in, you're supposed to come back and cut it afterwards. Cutting it afterwards is kind of a hassle because there's a lot of stuff in your way here, so you might not be able to actually get a angle grinder or whatever kind of tool you're using to cut through these back here. So this might be a point where you might want to just get it on, kind of give yourself a rough idea of where you need to cut, mark it, pull it back down, and then cut it, which I think I'm going to do myself just so that I'm not going to potentially hit any of the brake lines, our shock, or run into our exhaust here, just because our angle grinder is a bit too large to really fit back here. So I'm going to grab a marker, and I'm going to mark it maybe a couple threads above our roll plate here, and then we can cut it off. I'm going to stick this in a vise and just hold on to it that way, so I've got something that's nice and stable holding this in place. So I've got each of my bolts cut down now. That way I didn't have to do it up in this tight area. Let me get my plate to cooperate now. A little bit off. Once we get our nut on there and tighten it down, it should pull the rest of the way. But I'm going to get these other two in place. Well, so like I said, we'll have two at the back and then one at the front, and you'll see in just a second exactly why. you won't be able to get one of the pins in just because of where the roll plate sticks out at. All right, so here's exactly why. We got that plate right in the way, so we're only going to get the outer side that's closest to our leaf spring pack. And we'll have to lift up that little plastic bracket that's holding our wiring. I'll get these on, and then I'm going to snug each of these down with a 9/16 wrench. And I'll also snug down the other U-bolt nuts that we have up here as well. Alright, I need to get this one going more. I want to make sure that I have my U-bolt even on both sides. It's looking more even. At this point, I'm starting to get some resistance from it, so I'm going to grab our torque wrench and we are going to torque this down. Next, I will do that larger bolt that we also have running into our frame rail. I'll double check that just because we are pretty tight here. And yep, we're good. And then at this last point now, we are going to be doing our J-hooks. With these, you might end up needing a crow's foot. You might not. It just kind of really depends on how thin wall your socket is. So if you're using chrome, that'll probably be the better option. But also, you got a lot of stuff that's kind of in the way. So this is where we are going to have to play around with it and figure out what's actually going to fit in here. I might end up using a extension and get us just over the leaf spring pack here. So if you do have your wheel off, you probably have a really good access to these. With us having it on, I am going to have to fight past everything though. So here's exactly what I was talking about. I can almost get my socket on, but it's just not enough because of the roll plate being in the way. So here's where you're going to need that crow's foot. Now at this point, we have this one complete. The only thing we have left to do on this side is to reinstall that plastic bracket with those Torx bit screws that we have, and after that we can run our airline. Now the process over on our driver's side is going to be the exact same, so you can just repeat this all over on that one. And over on the driver's side, I do believe is where we're going to be placing our heat shield. So in your kit, you're going to get this, which is going to be flat when you first get it. I've already taken some pliers to it and I bumped it down so I could create some separation. So that way when this is sitting on here, it's got some airflow between it. That way it's not going to just be picking up all that heat and then just transferring the heat straight over to the bag. Now we've got the airflow to help kind of cool it down, so that way it protects our bag better. Now with this being a dual exhaust, you know, it really kind of limits you, hey, where do I want to put this? This side over here, the exhaust really isn't as close to our air spring as it is on the passenger side, so that's where I'm going to choose to put it. And when you do it, so you can see I've got kind of a bend right here. I would kind of bend it back a little bit, give yourself about a 1/2 inch spacing here, and then I bent another little portion. And then at the very tip, I've also kind of just bent it up a little bit, so that way when we get our hose clamped through there, it's going to have a little lip to kind of fight against, so there's less chance of it slipping off, even though it shouldn't, just because we're going to be tightening it down around our exhaust here. So once you get all that in, we will get to that point and show you how to hose clamp that up. One other thing you should definitely do at this point is just double check all your brake lines. Make sure that there's nothing that's going to be too close to where it's going to start rubbing if there's any vibration or movement, and then also any kind of electrical wires that might be ran around the same area. Now on the driver's side, I really didn't have to move that at all, but on the passenger side, the hard brake line, I did have to bend out a bit just to kind of get it away from the roll plate and then also away from our J pins over here. So right here at the roll plate, this was all the way up inside that lip. I did end up having to kind of gently bend it down to give it a little bit more clearance. Now once you have your heat shield bent up how you want it, we can get our hose clamp on. And now I can snug that down a bit more. Actually, set that in and get this started first. There we go. And I'm going to try to position this so that it's best holding away from our air spring. And I'm going to leave that just kind of snug while I get the other one. Get a little bit more snug than that. Too much. There we go. And now for this excess, I'm just going to snip that off. That way it's not dangling and potentially catching on anything. Then we can kind of just bend that back down. Get out of the way. So now at this point we have our heat shield installed, our air springs are both installed. Now we need to run our airline tubing, and this is a good chance to kind of start looking around, figure out where you're going to route your airlines and where you want the actual valves to sit at. Now typically we're going to be putting them on the passenger side right under where the lock is for your spare tire. On this one there's a lot of stuff behind it though, so there's a bunch of metal and we got wiring to where it's going to block me from being able to get a wrench on the backside, and we're going to need to because there's a jam nut so that we can set the length of how much of our valve is going to be exposed past the bumper. So at this point, this is where I am going to have to pick up a different bracket. Firestone sells these brackets for a very reasonable price, and they just zip tie right to whatever kind of cross member or trailer hitch you got on there. So I'm going to put that on, and then we can have both of our valves come right out there. And then if he ever wants to move it around, all he has to do is cut the zip tie and then move to wherever he needs it to be. So I have my airlines ran. We are going from the outside of our frame rail, and I just go straight up over the frame rail, and I am zip tied to this wire harness running across. You can see I got it on the top here, and we just keep going, and I kind of loop over as we start getting over to our spare tire holder. And I am zip tied to the same harness right here, and it just keeps on going over until we get down to our area where I mounted up our bracket to actually hold the Schrader valves. And I've looped it up because we do have some excess, and it's nice to have a little bit just in case you do end up deciding, hey, maybe I don't want this on my driver's side anymore, I want to move it over to the passenger side. Well, we got enough length, we can move it really easily. So I've wound it up, I zip tied the two together, so I've also got my driver's side in here too. And then I've also zip tied it to the harnesses just to kind of keep it tucked up out of the way, because this is right where our spare tire is going to live. So I want to try to keep this line away from that spare tire so it's not hitting it or rubbing against it, but I also don't want to put too sharp of a bend in this either because I don't want to kink the line here. Now we can trace this back to our driver's side, but it's essentially going to be the same setup here. We're just going right over the frame rails, and then on the outside of the frame rail we come right back down to our bag. So not really much to show you on this one just because there wasn't a lot we had to really run through. But at this point now, we were going to do another leak test just to make sure that our airlines are fully seated into our air fittings. And to do so, we will need to fill these back up. I'm going to go up to about 50 PSI because that's typically what we want to do. These bags can go all the way up to 100, so we're hitting that halfway point. So it's going to be enough pressure to really start showing some air bubbles if we are leaking. Now that we've tested we have no air leaks, we are good to drop our PSI back down to 5. That way our bags aren't going to get damaged. Typically when you're in that unloaded position, you just want to drop those right back down. Otherwise, if you have it too high up, it's going to give you a real stiff ride quality, and that's not really what you want when you're unloaded. So, well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the PacBrake Alpha HD airbag suspension kit here on our 2020 GMC Sierra 1500. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your Sierra, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.